Hello again, honeys, and welcome to your Tuesday Beesness. This is your host, Celia, back at it again with a whole new round of Arts World updates and headlines from the week of November 9th through the 15th. But one quick thing first. We know that the holiday season is upon us, and that means that everyone's getting busy with all kinds of family and friends plans. But we wanted to take a moment and let you know we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep producing our regular episodes, the Beesness, the monthly specials, the 5-minute musicals through the end of the year, and close out our Fall 2025 Holiday Special series with a specially themed December episode as well. So if you're looking for entertainment on your plane ride, car trip, whatever the case may be, we've got you. And with that, your weekly stories. There were a few different updates this week on Headlines Past. We heard that 3 paintings by Bob Ross raised $600,000 at the first auction of 3 benefiting the nonprofit syndicator American Public Television. On Tuesday of the last week, these 3 original canvases of the 30 total were Cliffside from 1990 and then 2 from 1993, Home in the Valley, as well as Winter's Peace. And the spaceship-shaped Lucas Museum of Narrative Art announced that it will open its 35 galleries in September of 2026 in LA's Exposition Park. The collection will feature over 40,000 works that span from Frida Kahlo and Norman Rockwell to Jack Kirby and Lucas's own film props. Last week also saw Eric Adams and Zohran Mamdani clash over the Elizabeth Street Art Garden after the Department of Citywide Administrative Services Commissioner Luis Molina confirmed that the city's housing authority will transfer management of the property to the Parks Department upon completion of a licensing agreement in a letter, reviewed of course by our sources, sent to Parks and Recreation Commissioner Iris Rodriguez-Rosa on November 6th. The City of New York originally planned to begin construction on the plot of 123 units of affordable housing for low-income and LGBTQ+ seniors later this year, but gave up its eviction pursuit in June after several legal challenges delayed the process. The Adams administration vowed to build 620 affordable units at 3 alternative sites in Manhattan instead. Long story short, the outgoing mayor's move to grant the Elizabeth Street Garden a new parkland designation could throw a wrench in Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani's vow to renew the eviction of the plot to create affordable housing. The Philadelphia Art Museum's ousted director has also fired back with a lawsuit alleging that SUDA was accused by board members of quote-unquote misusing museum funds for personal gain. Per the Philadelphia Inquirer, this was a quote-unquote authorized pay increase of $39,000 across a 2-year period related to cost of living. The suit goes on to claim that the proverbial final straw in SUDA's dismissal was a disagreement over an alleged attempt by board chair Ellen Kaplan to bring on lobbyist Melissa Heller as a trustee, who SUDA found quote-unquote abrasive and quote not a cultural fit for a board that needed collaboration and stability, end quote. She argues that Kaplan went on to rally other board members against her in retaliation, which led to her firing. And we care about this headline because the art world was shocked about the entire thing and has questions about her dismissal as well, especially because SUDA successfully led the Canadian National Gallery prior to this role. Also, despite legal threats, the University of Leicester updated its trans-inclusive museum guidelines. The campaign group Freedom in the Arts, or FITA, had threatened to sue the university over quote-unquote misleading guidance on furthering transgender inclusion in museums and galleries, demanding that it remove trans-inclusive culture guidelines from its website in an August 7th letter, but the museum's updates completed last month show no such changes. The university itself went on to tell Arts Professional that the 44-page guidelines were, quote, regularly renewed and kept up to date, end quote. Meanwhile, FITA sent a second letter November 3rd arguing that the new guidance is, quote-unquote, unlawful, and objecting in particular to the guidelines' bathroom etiquette. We applaud the university for upholding their mission of accessibility to all. And in what I hope will be our last Louvre update for a while, it has rolled out emergency security measures following the heist. The Louvre's board of directors met at the request of French Minister of Culture Rachida Dati on Friday to implement these new measures spanning 4 categories: security governance, site protection, coordination with police services, and technical and human resources, according to their press release publicized last week. A more concrete example of what that means is that they plan to increase their staff training budget by 20%, improve transition equipment, update current procedures and protocols, and, quote, create a cybersecurity operations center, end quote, according to our sources. Metallica's guitarist Kirk Hammett is also selling his $10 million painting of Conan the Barbarian, more accurately titled Conan the Berserker from 1967. He bought the piece, which also served as cover art for a paperback edition of Robert E. Howard's novel, Conan the Conqueror, from the artist Frank Frazetta for $1 million in 2009. It will be offered at Heritage Auctions' Hollywood Entertainment auction on December 9th through 10th. The same company is also selling the infamous witch hat from The Wizard of Oz. The minimum bid for Margaret Hamilton's iconic topper is $100,000. The price point also likely reflects the fact, however, that it was created by the anonymous costume designer Adrian, who worked on dozens of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer films in the 1930s and 40s. Headlines also announced last week that a scientific art analysis firm has launched the world's first insured authenticity guarantee for artworks, or so it says. Art Discovery's CEO, Dennis Mossive, told Art News that their process combines, quote, connoisseurship and provenance research with laboratory science and proprietary AI, then backs the conclusion with an insurance policy from an A-plus rated global insurer, end quote, plus provides a guarantee that if that certified attribution is later proven incorrect, the policy will cover the financial loss to the artwork's owner. Moisive explains, quote, for collectors and sellers, that means confidence at the moment of exchange. For lenders, it converts a historically uninsurable risk into one that can finally be underwritten, end quote. The announcement is being celebrated by some in the industry as a potential game changer in this business that often involves lawsuits by unhappy buyers. It also reflects a growing trend of AI art authentication companies springing up over the last few years. And sticking with the topic of AI for a minute, a prankster with a cause snuck AI artwork into a UK museum last week. Conceptual artist Elias Morrow said he secretly hung an AI-generated artwork titled Empty Plate inside the National Museum, Cardiff's Contemporary Galleries, on October 29th, where it remained on view for several hours before staff removed it. Morrow told the BBC that he intended to question, quote, how public institutions decide what's worth showing and what happens when something outside that system appears within it, end quote, through his placement of the work, which depicts a Welsh schoolboy in uniform holding an empty plate and a book. I think it's important to note the title and subject of this piece likely reference a 2024 report titled Empty Plates and Cold Homes, which found that 25% of over 2,000 UK respondents had struggled to put food on the table for their children at some point in the last year. Morrow did say the museum was allowed to keep the work as he considered it a gift. The Why We Care here is well put by Art News, who writes, quote, while short-lived, Morrow's most recent unsanctioned edition echoes a lineage of guerrilla artists that challenge institutional standards, end quote. He also has a bit of a hot take on AI. He sees using it to generate the image as, quote, part of the natural evolution of artistic tools, end quote, explaining that he first sketched the concept before realizing it with AI. We also got word that 24 years after a nighttime heist, an 18th century painting has been returned to a Mexican church. On the night of January 6, 2001, wow, that seems to be a popular day for breaking and entering, thieves entered the Church of San Francisco de Asís in Teotihuacan, about 25 miles northeast of Mexico City, and stole 18 artworks, including the 6-foot-tall, full-length portrait of St. Francis of Assisi created in 1747. The painting was scheduled to be auctioned in 2018, but its stolen status was revealed when the house hosting the sale submitted its catalog to the Art Loss Register as part of its standard due diligence procedure. The return is significant because the painting is estimated to be worth 280,000 Mexican pesos, or about 15,000 US dollars, but the celebration notably is focused on its sentimental value. The church's Padre Teodoro Garcia Romero said, quote, for 2 decades we feared this treasure might be lost forever. Its return is a moment of excitement and faith for our church and city because we know that this will be a historic moment in the life of the community, end quote. A point of view echoed by Charlotte Chambers Farah, a business development and client manager at the Art Loss Register, who also said to our sources, quote, with thefts targeting public institutions and churches on the rise, this recovery offers hope not only to individual victims, but to whole communities as well. It's a reminder that stolen cultural heritage, which has enormous historic value, can be returned to its rightful home, end quote. Speaking of things returned to their homes, the Met repatriated an 18th century painting taken from a Buddhist temple. The panel, one of a 10-part piece known as Siwangdo and itself titled The 10th King of Hell, dates to 1798. It was stolen by U.S. occupying forces towards the end of the war, sometime after 1954. We noticed, though, that the Met itself did not make a big deal of this, only a subtle announcement of the return on its website. That might be because 6 of the panels of Siwangdo were returned by the Los Angeles County Museum of Art in 2020. Last week also saw a landmark 40-year-old sculpture by artist Ned Smith demolished for a Battery Park City resiliency project. Upper Room was Battery Park City's first public art piece, commissioned in 1986, and was previously appraised by the BPCA at $1.5 million, but was demolished Wednesday to make way for the controversial Northwest Battery Park City Resiliency Plan to integrate a coastal flood barrier management system to better protect against natural disasters. Smith and local residents alike expressed dissatisfaction with the project as well as the destruction of the statue rather than relocation of it or finding of other solutions. What we found notable about this, honeys, is that another famed statue recently got the same treatment in San Francisco. The brutalist Villacourt fountain was dismantled as a part of the renovation of Embarcadero Plaza, but both are in the sort of architectural styles that Trump is trying to ban from federal use. We're wondering if there's a connection here. Preservationists also publicized their petition to save the Wilbur Building, which opened in 1940 under FDR as part of the New Deal to house the Social Security Board, later Social Security Administration, but fears are growing that it could be demolished in spite of its landmark status earned by housing 20th century masterpieces, including murals by Philip Guston and Ben Shahn, as well as Voice of America, a now suspended by Trump U.S. government-funded multilingual news organization that broadcasted to countries with restricted media access. The California-based nonprofit building a database of New Deal public artworks across America, titled Living New Deal, launched that petition last week highlighting the pending threat to the Wilbur Building, one of 45 that the U.S. government has listed for quote-unquote accelerated disposal, meaning they can basically bypass public input on it. This is likely why the petition reads in part, quote, selling or privatizing this building without proper review would strip the American people of their rightful heritage and deny us any voice in the fate of our shared cultural property, end quote. As we have seen, Trump has made the aesthetic overhaul of civic architecture a priority of his second term, and this is the most recent target amongst deconstructivism and brutalist landmarks that he's gunning for. Also, the federal government agency overseeing its federal property, the General Services Administration, expressed interest in selling nearly half of the 26,000 artworks and artifacts in the building's holding. That could result in a major loss of public access to these materials, depending on whose hands exactly they end up in. We also heard that the Congolese Plantation Workers Art League, established in 2014 and recognized for the creation of the contemporary art museum, The White Cube, has put out a call to museums around the world to do more, saying that repatriation and land acknowledgement efforts, quote, have had surprisingly little impact on the communities whose labor financed many of these very institutions, end quote. The collective points out that museums like London's Tate Britain, Cologne's Ludwig Museum, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, the Van Abbe Museum in the Netherlands were all reliant in their founding on proceeds from plantations, and continue to be through their connections in various industries today. One such example of these connections, Henry Tate himself was a sugar merchant. The collective therefore developed a new free toolkit in collaboration with Human Activities, which was founded in 2012 by Dutch artist Renzo Martens, titled 7 Easy Steps for Museums to Liberate the Plantations that Funded Them. It calls for museums to, quote, move from symbolic gestures toward material, cultural, and ecological liberation, end quote. They presented that toolkit Monday, November 10th at a conference at the Wereld Museum in Amsterdam on the subject of restitution. And videos circulating online last week show more than a dozen young people rushing the grounds of the multi-million-dollar Nigerian Museum of West African Art during its opening while asserting that the museum is a violation of Benin City's cultural heritage, which falls under the authority of its traditional ruler. The protesters chanted in support of the Oba, or ruler of the Benin, as they raised concerns over the museum housing and or displaying the recently returned Benin bronzes. The guests were escorted to conflict-free zones and no one was reported hurt. The museum has delayed its public opening as a result, however, with no new date announced. Reports also indicated Anish Kapoor has threatened legal action after U.S. border agents posed next to his infamous bean sculpture. Local news outlets reported that agents in fatigues and sporting large firearms poured out of numerous SUVs just after 7 a.m. to gather in front of the 66-foot-long art piece. On Monday, one of the agents reportedly called out for his colleagues to say Little Village in place of cheese in reference to a neighborhood that is home to many Mexican Americans and where Border Patrol deployed tear gas in an enforcement raid over the previous weekend. In an email to Art News regarding this situation, Kapoor himself wrote, quote, "I am deeply horrified and saddened that U.S. Border Patrol has chosen to rally in front of Cloud Gate for their self-congratulatory photo op. In my view, they are no different to SS Nazi troops intimidating citizens and the people they deem to be immigrants," end quote. The artist went on to say he stands with Mayor Brandon Johnson in the latter's denunciation of Border Patrol's activity in Chicago. Kapoor directly responded, quote, "Of course I'm going to do everything I can," end quote, when asked later by the press if he would pursue legal action against Border Patrol. Kapoor has long been outspoken in his support of immigrants and refugees as a person born in Mumbai to an Iraqi Jewish mother and an Indian father. Governor J.B. Pritzker also criticized the photo shoot, writing on social media, quote, "Making fun of our neighborhoods and communities is disgusting," end quote. One thing pointed out by another quoted Chicago artist, Michael Rakowicz, because a lot of the agents in the photos are unmasked and the sculpture is super reflective, you can see a lot of them from different angles, which makes identifying them easier. Britain's BBC was shook last week by the resignations of its Director General Tim Davie and News Chief Deborah Turness amid accusations of bias in the editing of last year's documentary called Trump: A Second Chance. In it, the filmmakers spliced together quotes from different sections of the speech Trump made before the January 6, 2021 storming of the U.S. Capitol that made the resulting footage seem as though he was directly calling for violence. But this uproar, along with previous ones, has proven that video editing is taking on a new significance in journalism. A previous suit by Trump against CBS's parent company, Paramount, resulted in a $16 million legal settlement over an edit of Kamala Harris's 60 Minutes interview, as well as network changes to how interviews on news shows are edited and or aired after Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem complained about how she was portrayed in Face the Nation back in August. What we're seeing, honeys, is that video editing is becoming more and more of a fraught journalistic skill as well as field, and that is largely because of the rise of Reels and conservative backlash. AP News writes, quote, "Questioning edits is another tool for the president to strike back at journalists who displease him," end quote, but also speaks to the difficulties of good journalism. They go on to explain that, quote, "Sometimes the perfect image does not exist, or a quote isn't as succinct or sharp as a medium under constant time constraints demands that can lead to the temptation to rearrange or even manipulate," end quote, which is universally recognized bad practice. The ability of AI to manufacture completely false video, as well as the proliferation of short videos via TikTok and Instagram, has added pressure to journalists to provide engaging and factual information, not simply content, our sources say. In this particular case with the BBC, it seems to have been a combination of both. As for the backlash portion, said Mark Lukasiewicz, a former NBC News executive and now dean of Hofstra University School of Communications, the BBC drama would likely have led to a quick correction, an apology, and then everyone would have moved on in a different time. But, quote, "In an era where every editing decision taken in a newsroom is now under a microscope and can be weaponized for political purposes, it's got to be something that is causing real caution in newsrooms all over the world right now," end quote. He stated that he thinks the consequences of mistakes are more serious than perhaps they used to be because of the ability and the willingness of politicians to seize on them. This particular situation with the BBC seems to involve both factors. According to a new survey of museum directors conducted by the American Alliance of Museums and published on Tuesday, 1/3 of American museums have lost government grants and contracts since Trump took office, with 2/3 unable to recover that money. The average grant loss experienced by museums was $30,000. The survey's 511 respondents' answers gave further information to how institutions are struggling to reckon with these cuts while already dealing with the ongoing trends of rising costs and declining attendance. 1/3 of respondents said they had deferred or delayed construction or renovation. A fourth canceled or reduced their number of programs aimed at students, rural audiences, people with disabilities, elderly individuals, or veterans, and 1/10 laid off staff. The survey also provided key future insight, with director expectations for 2026 being that ideological and political polarization will continue to be disruptions, but that the biggest hurdles will be shifts in philanthropy, A response from 63% of respondents, inflation, 53% of respondents, financial and market instability, 52%, changes to travel and tourism, 48%, and the reduction or elimination of government funding, 47%. Those fractions, the 1/3, 1/4, 1/10, reflect what those of us in the arts have been witnessing all year. And I hope they provide you a tangible way of understanding why it is that I've been harping on this all year. A bit of good news, however, the National Gallery of Art and the 21 Museum Network, known as the Smithsonian, will officially begin welcoming the public once more on Friday with plans to return to normal following the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. And the French art world was outraged last week by a proposed bit of legislation that would make it the only major art hub to impose a wealth tax on the possession of works. A joint statement issued by major organizations such as the Gallery Association Comité Professionnel des Galeries d'Art and the Fair Group called Art, as well as 124 other signatories, all fully condemned the move on November 14th. The change to tax law was provisionally approved by MPs in a first reading on the 31st of October and is due to go before the French Senate on November 24th and then will be examined by a joint parliamentary committee before returning to the National Assembly. So the issue is not imminent, but our sources were quick to point out that according to the latest Art Basel/UBS report, in 2024, France contributed more than half the EU's art market value at $4.2 billion US, which also put it at the world's fourth largest art market. Yet Matthias Arejan, the president of the Syndicat des Négociants in Art, a negotiation representing galleries and dealers, told La Gazette du Haut that the consequences, quote, would be disastrous, a definite flight of works of art and heritage from France, and, quote, more than 1,500 people, many of them artists, have also signed a separate petition against the proposed bill. Syrian cultural authorities also faced scrutiny last week over their lack of transparency following a heist. They appeared to publish details of the 6 Roman-era objects stolen from the Damascus National Museum on Sunday, only to delete the brief statement hours later. A move that intensified demands for information about the stolen objects and how the investigation is unfolding. The headline stood out, honeys, because this theft comes amid a cultural heritage looting surge following the fall of the 54-year Assad dictatorship last December, and is bringing back into the spotlight previously noted concerns about the museum's security capabilities. According to an agency spokesperson, quote, during an assessment of the museum conducted this summer, UNESCO did note serious deficiencies in safety provisions, end quote, and is currently supporting the museum with the purchase of quote-unquote essential security upgrades based on their own limited resources. Now, you may have noticed, honeys, that I have been avoiding a particularly popular topic in last week's news, the release of the Epstein files. There were exchanges that he had with artists, there were exchanges that he had about art, but little of it appears to actually have to do with Epstein's crimes, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on that man. So we'll link these stories in our episode document with the rest of our sources. If you want to check them out on your own, feel free. In lighter news, we also learned of a study published November 10th in Antiquity by researchers from the University of Sydney, which provides new evidence that might solve one of South America's most enduring archaeological mysteries, Monte Sierpe, or the Band of Holes. Researchers believe that the nearly 1-mile stretch of more than 5,000 circular depressions carved into the desert hills of Peru's Pisco Valley may have functioned as a pre-Inca trading center, then adapted by the Inca Empire into a sophisticated accounting system, especially because the team identified geometric patterns in the holes which mirror the structure of knotted string recording devices used to track goods and tribute called quipus by the Inca. Further proof lies in soil samples, which revealed traces of maize and reeds, agricultural goods frequently traded at the time, as well as its placement between 2 Inca administrative centers, as well as the crossroads of major pre-Hispanic trade routes. Said the lead of the study, Jacob Bongers, quote, this is an extraordinary discovery that expands understandings about the origins and diversity of indigenous accounting practices within and beyond the Andes, end quote. And for our final headline of the day, we return to the question, to selfie or not to selfie. Opinions remain divided, but we are seeing increasingly more participants in this debate on banning selfies in art museums. One of the earliest examples, you may recall from our reporting, was Florence's Uffizi Galleries, which announced their plans to impose quote-unquote precise limits on selfies after a visitor damaged a painting while trying to selfie in June of this year. The museum's director said the policy aimed to curb behavior, quote, incompatible with respect for cultural heritage, end quote. For an example of a much longer standing and complete ban on photography, we can look to New York's The Frick Collection, which instituted these rules after visitors nearly collided with unbarriered artworks in the past. But last week came with insight into the matter from Ross Perry, professor of museum technology at the University of Leicester, who pointed out that some restrictions might simply reflect operational or safety needs, given that the UK's 1,700 museums widely vary in physical space, as do most museums around the world. Museums should consider that question of selfieing or not on a case-by-case basis. And there you have it, honeys, your updates for the week. I hope you all are taking care, staying warm as it gets increasingly colder out there. Never forget to hydrate or dihydrate. We will talk soon. This podcast and this episode were produced, created, hosted, fact-checked, and edited by yours truly, master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Make sure to follow us on social media and subscribe wherever you listen.